Welcome again, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon for those joining today's webcast, the top 5 capabilities you need to protect against advanced threats. I think this is a fantastic, very timely topic, and I'm very happy to welcome Senior Forrester Research Analyst Rick Holland, who is going to start off the webcast with an overview talking about specifically the top 5 capabilities. My name is John Vecchi, Vice President of Marketing with Solera Networks. I will follow Rick with an overview of what we mean by big data security analytics and how it helps deliver advanced threat protection. So we've got a jam-filled agenda today. Please note that you can issue questions. We are going to complete the webcast today with the Q&A session live. So please feel free to issue your questions, in the interface you have there on your screen. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. But with that, I am going to introduce to all of you Rick Holland.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I know you're busy with your day-to-day jobs, so setting aside an hour to listen to us talk is no small thing. So I very much appreciate you taking time to join us. My name is Rick Holland. I'm a senior analyst with Forrester Research, and I've been at Forrester coming up on 2 years. Prior to that, I was a sales engineer with a national security reseller. And so I have a background before that as a practitioner. So a lot of what I talk about, I leverage my days when I was actually a practitioner. John, should I be sharing now?
Yeah, I think you should be able to advance, but if not, I can advance for you, Rick.
Okay. No, I've got it. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about the threat landscape. We'll have the default, update on the threat landscape, what we're seeing. We're going to talk about 5 key capabilities that you're going to need to deal with the threat landscape that we have today. And then we're going to talk about recommendations, some high-level recommendations that I have for you as you look forward and trying to solve the problems that we're all facing day to day. To start off with, this will be the logo slide that you don't want to be on. And I always kind of update this every couple weeks when I do a new presentation. Forrester called 2011 and 2012 the golden age of hacking. And if you look at the year to date, we're definitely continuing that trend. Some of these that I think are notable to mention, one of which is the Bit9, which we'll talk a little bit more as we progress through the deck a little bit. But Bit9 continued supply chain attack, state-sponsored attack, very challenging for companies to face that type of adversary. I also think the Twitter and AP ones are pretty interesting. Thankfully, Twitter has released 2-factor authentication, so it's not the panacea, but at least it will be helping us out a little bit. And I think the Kinetic one, if you weren't familiar with Kinetic, it's actually the UK version of DARPA, so military research for the UK. The character Q from the James Bond series is actually based on Kinetic, which is kind of neat. They actually were attacked, owned for at least 3 years. They were a good example of how not to do, and this is the U.S. subsidiary of them, how not to do incident response. They only let their consultants come in for 3 days, and who can really do an investigation in 3 days? You may barely be done setting up all of your gear. So if you look, so let's talk about some security basics, right? CISSP, any kind of intro to security class, this is one of the fundamental things that we're taught. We all know this, integrity, availability, and confidentiality. What you have today is this is the new triangle. We have no integrity. The confidentiality has been replaced with compromised, and so essentially we have highly available compromised networks. This is a big problem for us, and if you look at the security solutions that we've been using to try to deal with these highly available and compromised networks, the traditional approach hasn't worked. The blacklisting, focusing on the perimeter. The interesting thing is, how many times have you heard the traditional approach doesn't work? But time and time again, many customers that I work with, Forrester clients, still are relying on the traditional approach to securing their networks. and it's just not going to do it. So today, what I wanted to talk to you about was 5 categories of capabilities that you need to be able to deal with the threat landscape. And at the end, I think we'll probably talk a little bit about some strategies on how to make this actually happen as well. So moving into those. First one up is visibility. Here's one that you've heard lots about. You've got to have visibility into the environment to see what's going on. It's the most critical thing. And I think if you look back, I mentioned the Bit9 incident. How are you going to detect trusted software that's doing malicious activity? You're going to need some kind of visibility on the network. And if you go back to, we talked about the CIA triangle before, another piece that we have, trust but verify, right? You probably remember these firewall interfaces where you actually had a trusted port and an untrusted port. Untrusted port is what went to the internet. Well, this approach is also fundamentally wrong. There should not be any trusted port. We cannot trust any of the data that we have. And this kind of ties into a Forrester model, which some of you may be familiar with, which is the zero trust model. So what I'm going to do is dig into the zero trust model a little bit and the components that we have. And the zero trust model is essentially Forrester's recommendation for architecting, designing networks today to deal with the threat landscape. And we're going to hone in on one of these pieces, but I'll broadly go over the steps. The first piece is that all resources are accessed in a secure manner regardless of location. This could be two-factor authentication for certain types of data for certain types of users. We have a much stricter access control than we've had in the past. We actually have a subset of research called zero trust identity that digs into that. Of course, verify and never trust is the whole mantra of our entire model. Inspect and log all traffic, and that's what we'll be focusing in on today. And then finally, the network is designed from the inside out, right? The whole castle keep kind of analogy is not the way that we need to be doing it. Another piece that's often cliche, talking about we need to have a data-centric approach, but in reality, you hear analysts talk about it, you hear CISOs talk about it, but we are seeing companies starting to design their networks that way, but by and large, that's not the case. It's very slow movement there. So one of the key components of the inspect and log all traffic is an area that we call network analysis and visibility. And basically, we grouped a number of different technologies in here. You may have seen the NBAD, the network behavioral analysis detection, previously, but this is what Forrester calls this suite. And there's a lot of areas that it covers. And you'll notice in these 5 broad capabilities that there's lots of overlap. So some of these products are doing multiple pieces. The first is the network discovery. So this is tools that help you find and track assets. Next up is flow data analysis. So the NetFlow, JFlow types of capabilities, where a lot of times people will start in this area and then go to more robust capabilities as they work their way around. And then, of course, packet capture and analysis. This is kind of your network DVR type of capability. For me, when I was a practitioner, my packet capture and analysis was taking a laptop and with a sniffer on it and hooking it up and then sniffing traffic, and that's how I did it. And that doesn't really scale very well, kind of problematic. Then you have network metadata analysis, and this is where instead of capturing all of the packets, you're capturing key metadata about those packets. So it saves some space for storage. It gives customers another option. And then finally, you have the network forensics examination, and this really comes down to some of the use cases where the tools have specifics for incident response, specific use cases for forensic types of activities. And this is broadly what Forrester calls the NAV, network analysis and visibility space. And if you look at this space, which, the first one we're starting off with, right, it's really what we feel is a key component of zero trust and what we need to be able to defend our networks against the threat landscape. But adoption is stagnant in this area. So we're a research firm. We love data. We do annual surveys, and our 2013 survey is actually in the field right now. We're going to get it back in early July. We're excited about that. But between 2011 and 2012, there's been no growth in adoption of NAV solutions, and this is a problem for me. There needs to be more growth here. I think this says that we're investing our security dollars in the wrong places, and this is one of the top investment areas that I would recommend for you. Today we've seen, well, in 2011 and 2012, we only saw 22% of organizations have a NAV solution implemented. We see 9% planning to adopt within the next 12 months. We see another 28% that are interested or no plan. So I think this is this sounds pretty cool, but this isn't a top priority for us. And then if you look at the verticals, it kind of breaks out. Financial services leads the way, and I think that stands to reason. Typically a little bit more mature of a security practice in the financial services space. A lot has to do with compliance requirements they have. And then retail lags behind, behind all the other ones. So I think this is a troubling statistic, and maybe with the 2013 survey, it'll be different. The 2012 one was fielded this time last year, so the threat landscape has ratcheted up since then. So I'm hoping that we see some movement up, 26, 30%, something like that. But we'll see. I'll know that answer here in about probably a month and a half. So as you look at the different solutions that are out there to handle this for you, there's a number of things that we need to think about. I think the first one is it needs to be scalable give you scalable visibility into your network. If something's not scalable, it's just not going to work for you. And of course, we say inspect and log all traffic, and that's very much aspirational. You know, to go from you're only looking at the perimeter to try to inspect and log all traffic is a long, long journey. So what we say is to make this scalable is you have a data-centric approach. You understand the most important programs that you need to be monitoring. You understand the most important people, the roles in your organization that you need to monitor, and that's where you start. You do that visibility on the most important stuff. Things like NetFlow, they're only looking at layers 3 and 4. They're not enough when responding to incidents. We need to know what the true application is doing, so we need deep packet inspection. Good place to start, and as you mature the program, you'll realize that you want that layer 7 visibility. We want the full packet capture capability, but we also want the ability to leverage metadata. And part of the reason for this is just from a storage perspective. You know, talk about scalability. If you want to do full packet capture, and if you think about a Forrester client, most of our clients are very large multinational organizations. You know, we're going to have scalability challenges from a cost perspective, as well as all the operational components of it. So metadata and only capturing certain data gives a company the flexibility to maybe not do full packet capture everywhere, and be selective in what they do. It's all about options for enterprises. And we need to have that visibility, branch office to the data center, virtual environments, cloud infrastructure. Now the bottom two, I cover virtualization security. Most companies don't have very little visibility into their virtual environments. Largely security has been skipped for those environments. Now that people are thinking about public cloud infrastructure, they're starting to ask questions that they never really asked on the virtual security. So I think that is good. It's making us take a look back at our virtual environments. Just from a statistics perspective, we see when a company has about 70% of their data center workstations, servers rather, virtualized, then they start looking at security much closer than they did in the past. There's no more low-hanging fruit. So we really need a solution that's going to be able to handle all of those different form factors and deployment locations in the environment. Okay, so next one up is big data. Now big data is hot, right? If you were at RSA or InfoSec Europe, big data is flashing around everywhere, part of the keynotes left and right. One thing that I like to do with our surveys, right, we do these annual security surveys, but I always like to get, if you notice this one here, this one is from 3,600 business decision makers. So this is not IT. And what I would say is, here's the question, is which of the following technology initiatives are you asking IT to prioritize? Number one is improve the use of data and analytics to improve business decisions and outcomes. So my first question to you would be, if you look at your priorities from a security perspective and compare that to the business, are you guys even on the same sheet? Typically we'll find that security organizations that aren't engaged with the business will be focusing on the wrong thing. So my first recommendation to you, if you take one thing away from this webcast beyond the kind of technology piece, is make sure that you understand what the business wants so that you can align technology purchases that are going to support those outcomes. So I really like this data. I think it's important for us to kind of step back and think beyond security and beyond IT. So the business wants big data because they've bought in on the uses of it, particularly if you come from a company that has a business analytics background. I actually find companies that do BI, lots of web presence where they're looking at all kinds of transactions on the web, they're much more accustomed to big data because they've been using that big data for some time. So it's natural for them to adopt it from a security perspective. So Forrester last year, my colleague and I, John Kindervog, as well as Heidi, Shea came up with our big data security and control framework. And this is actually how we try to manage big data. And there's 3 steps to it. It's define, dissect, and defend. Now, in the first piece, define, that is actually one of the biggest struggles that companies have right now, is understanding the most important data and then being able to dynamically classify it. But once you move past that and work your way down, you've got the intelligence piece and the analytics piece. And that's kind of where the analytics is going to tie in from big data from a security vendor. And what that allows us to do is then defend the data. We know what the important data is, we know how it's being used, and then we can set up the appropriate access controls on it. We can do the appropriate visibility on it, so maybe it's full packet capture for certain types of data at certain locations. Of course, if you don't have a data disposal program, we definitely need to have something so you're retiring and then finally killing data. If you don't need it, get rid of it. And you can kill data after you dispose, and then what you're going to keep, you kill it by encrypting it and tokenizing it. So that's kind of the framework that we think about big data for. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the context of big data analytics from a security vendor. And a lot of this stuff is going to be the gears that are behind the curtain. You're not going to see a lot of this stuff. You're going to hear similar stories probably from a lot of vendors on heuristics, statistical detection, visualization. I think the most important thing when I think about big data analytics is to see the use cases and have the vendor show you what they mean by big data analytics. Big data analytics, so what? What use cases do you have that are actually going to work? This is where testing it out in your environment is really critical. I think big data can be overwhelming. We see this more and more data is coming in. SIM was overwhelming enough for us as it was. At RSA, I did a panel on big data there, and we talked about, I asked everyone, maybe 200 people in the room, how many people have deployed a SIM solution? Everyone raised their hand. I said, how many people successfully deployed a SIM solution? And almost all the hands went down. And then I said, how many people have deployed a big data solution? Hadoop, Mongo, something along those lines. And very few people raised their hands. So from an enterprise perspective, very few of my clients, outside of companies that are heavy into business analytics stuff or intelligence, have deployed big data solutions. So I think we can leverage our vendors who have these big data networks set up, and they'll kind of be maybe our first foray into big data. So the next one up is one that is near and dear to me, and it's also something that you hear a lot about, is threat intelligence. And once again, just because you hear a lot about it and your eyes may roll over because it's become a cliche, a conference cliche, does not mean that there's no value in it. And I have a very, this is one of my main research areas I get pretty excited about. I'm a former intelligence analyst from the U.S. Army, and so I really kind of geek out on intel stuff. But I think when you think about intelligence, I think actionable intelligence is absolutely critical, and this kind of comes back to the big data. The global sensors that a company has, in addition to what you have on your premises, are going to feed their cloud, it's going to feed your environment, and you need to do that analytics there. And what comes out needs to be actionable intelligence. And one of the ways that there's many different ways that we're going to look and try to leverage intelligence, but one of the ways is sandboxing. Now, I'm of the position that malware sandboxing is a feature. Much like you've seen DLP become a feature in email gateways and web gateways, when I look across the security landscape and the vendors, over the past 18 months, literally everyone has developed and released or is roadmapped some type of sandboxing capability. So we expect that to be built into our solutions. Some flexibility to be able to do it on-prem or in the cloud. Many customers don't want to do it in the cloud for some cases because there's a certain piece of malware that's very sophisticated and they're very concerned about operational security and don't want to tip off the bad guys. But I think that should be on your checklist. Any security product you look at needs to have sandboxing built into it. Of course, our traditional whitelist and blacklist, which we've been doing that for quite some time, but also we want to be able to look at reputation on IPs, files, URLs. I guess it's really files and URLs is what I mean here, because the IPs is our typical whitelist and blacklist. So we expect that to be there. We also want people to pull in OSINT data for us. So we want our vendors, now you could go out, let me step back and say there's a distinction. There's two different types of consumers for intelligence. I use the analogy, I don't know if anyone watches Sons of Anarchy on FX, but the 1%ers versus the 99%. The 1%ers are the outlaw motorcycle gangs. They're the the cream of the crop guys. And the one percenters in this analogy are the financial services and the defense industrial base. They are standing up, have stood up their own intelligence teams, the very large companies. They're one type of consumer, and the way they want to handle intelligence is completely different than the other 99% who maybe they just want a feed. They don't have the ability to stand up a bunch of OSINT capability within their organization. So you have kind of two different consumers. So depending on where you are, you're going to use the features of a product differently. But one of the ways, if you're in the 99%, is the vendors are going to be pulling in these feeds, and they're going to do a little bit of cleanup for you on them, and then you're going to get some context about your organization. So there is no easy button here, but it's definitely one thing is you want to understand how vendors leverage intelligence to make your job easier, to make it actionable. The other piece that I think is really important is to be able to consume third-party intelligence. So you may get something from the Department of Homeland Security that you want a product to be able to ingest. You may get something from one of your peers in the FSI stack or the MSI stack or whatever ISAC it is, or just one of your, your 1, 2, 3 trusted partners. We need to be able to consume these. And I think from my perspective, it's an area of opportunity for most of the vendors out there is to be able to, at scale, consume indicators and sometimes complex indicators. Today we can consume IPs and hashes and things like that, but more complex with timestamps and this number, 20,000 IPs. There's not a lot of sophistication generally it's actually a big opportunity for me when I do waves now going forward. I'm kicking off my next wave next month or in July. This is going to be one of the biggest significant weight for how I look at vendors and how they consume third-party intelligence and make you be able to act on the information that you've got. So it's definitely something that every solution set you look at, find out how they're handling intelligence, but find out how they make your job easier. We don't need snort alerts. I love snort, use snort quite a lot, but we don't want the 90s snort alerts consuming everything that we're doing. So if you move on to the next, enterprise grade. So what do I mean by enterprise grade? Enterprises want to have a menu. There's not one size that fits all for companies, so they want to have some flexibility to choose the types of features that they need. And as we kind of alluded to before, we have a lot of different environments that we need to protect, so we need different form factors available to us. You may want to deploy it on an appliance. You may be a huge VMware shop and you want to be able to do it on a virtual appliance, or for certain office locations or types of offices you want to do it virtual. Maybe you want to roll your own on your own hardware, your own commodity hardware, and you want to put the software on it. So if there's one thing I've noticed from companies is even if you don't necessarily plan on using a certain capability today, it's nice to know that, hey, we aren't going to do VMware today, but in 6 to 8 months, maybe that's the route that we want to go. So having that flexibility is really, really important. Unified reporting and administration, single pane of glass, add it to the cliche list, but it's still really important. Now, of course, there'll never be one single pane of glass, one pane of glass to rule them all for all of your security infrastructure. But you want to minimize those single panes of glass. So you want to, once again, we'll talk about it in a second, it comes down to the operational pieces. You want it to be as easy as possible for your organization. Network performance is pretty big. Now, this kind of gets into the speeds and feeds type of piece, which generally I don't find to be, you could be a couple release cycles away from a competitor having that capability, but you definitely want to think about the throughput in your core network and what would be required to provide visibility there, and think about your growth plans. And talk to the vendors and say, look, we're 10 today, but we're going to 20, or we're going to 40, or we're in higher education and we have some massive pipes that we're doing between other universities, whatever the case may be. We need to think about that network performance and make sure that the device is actually scalable to what's going on. The next piece, and we kind of touched on it a little bit before, with the metadata versus full packet capture, is the ability to minimize disk storage. Now, I talked to a wide range of customers where they don't really care. Storage for them is relatively cheap, so they're going to do full packet capture everywhere. But I do think there's some vertical trends there with financial services that may be more interested in that than others. But I think the ability to say, look, we're going to do metadata because we need to save money on storage costs. I mean, this is a big investment. If you look at that number of only 22% of organizations have invested in a NAV type of solution, these are some of the costs that are associated with it that people may not think about just when they look at a quote from a vendor. And the next one up, right? This one is near and dear to me because I spent, I don't know, 10 years of my life as an InfoSec practitioner, and it's all about operations. So let me ask you a question. How many of you have solutions, blinking lights on racks, that you purchased, you didn't get training on, you didn't have professional services come in, maybe because you couldn't afford it, or maybe because you wanted to kind of roll your own and do it yourself, but then that solution wasn't maximized? So you make a significant six-figure investment in widget X, but then it's blinking lights on a rack. I kind of use the analogy, we have a sports car with no gas, and in some cases with no driver because we don't have the skill set to drive it. We don't know how to shift the gears in it. So we have this really powerful piece of technology, but we're not maximizing our investment. And then you wonder when the CISO goes to the CFO to get money for the next project, whatever that may be, well, what was our return on our previous investment? So I think it's really, really important to make sure that we maximize the solutions that we purchase. You don't want them to slow things down, right? You want them to speed things up, and that's going to be a good lead-in to the next one that I have, which is it's all about an ecosystem. The days of point products are dead, or the days of purchasing point products should be dead, right? Solutions should speed detection and response, not inhibit it. Many, many years ago, just as an example, product came out, does binary analysis of malware. Suddenly, I'm inundated with a bunch of alerts, and I don't know if this machine was actually infected or not, and it's actually it's opened up my eyes to lots and lots of malware in my environment, but I don't know if it's what I need to be looking at or not. So it actually created more work for us and slowed things down. And that's not what we want, right? We want an ecosystem where there's integrations. So actually, speaking of wave criteria, on all the waves that I do, integrations are a really, really core component. And I mean true integrations. I came from the channel as a reseller, and a lot of times I would hear vendors say, we have a partnership with this company. Sure, we're on pricing sheets and things like that. I mean actual integrations from within the consoles of products and things like that, where there's actual workflows. So whenever I talking to customers and we're thinking about technology purchases, that's one of my questions is, how does this integrate with SIM? How does this integrate with the network? In this case, we are talking about a network product. What is the tie-in with endpoint security solutions? I want to know the actual vendors. Give me the logos. Sure, I want to know the logo list, but I also want to see the workflows that you have set up. The other piece is I think the APIs are important. You hear more and more about APIs these days just because of a lot of the SaaS services and people want to be able to connect back data from the cloud. But in this case, I think there's kind of two consumers of APIs. One is vendors need to have good APIs so that they can build out the ecosystem, right? So that their partners, their endpoint product partners, their SIM product partners can integrate with those APIs. But then also, if you go back to my 1%, 99% analogy, the 1%ers have the time, have the resources to actually engage that API to do all kinds of customization. So depending on where you sit, you want to make sure there's an API so that you know that your other vendors can integrate into it, or so that you can do whatever types of scripting programming you want to do to get this solution integrated into workflows that may not exist out of the box. Okay, so kind of to go through some of my recommendations. So adopt a zero trust mindset. We have research on that. If you're interested in more about zero trust and how we're doing, it's probably about my colleague John Kindervag developed it about 3 years ago. Lots of traction there, but we need to think about zero trust. Even if you're not adopting, all of that framework, think about some sections. But most importantly, let's just assume all packets are bad, and we need to be monitoring them. If funding is scarce, actually I get this call quite a bit. The call is, okay, Rick, I don't have a lot of money. I need to look at a particular, what about product X? What about this? What about that? And I typically will say most customers have a SIM solution, so they have that log management, which is absolutely critical for incident response. But SIM has never been, to my comment earlier about everyone at RSA lowering their hands about successful implementations, SIM has never really been that, dashboard of what's really going on in an environment. that's where I think nav is. You know, I have customers that will deploy a nav solution, and they get visibility into anomalous activity that's happening much faster than they ever could with SIM. SIM still plays a significant role in the technologies that you have. It needs to be in that ecosystem. But I really think nav is fundamental. I think if you think of from the protection or prevention is going to fail, this is where we need to be investing our money. And then I think, mentioned it before, but you know, I can mention it on and on and on. I just was in DC 3 weeks ago at a big Forrester event talking to about 30 of our CISOs there, and that data-centric approach is where people want to go. It's very difficult to move in that direction because a lot of the process, oversight, governance type components, some of the technologies there, but we really need to know what data we need to protect, because then we can say, okay, we may not be able to invest all of these products, but we can invest this on the most important data that we have. And I think, let's see. I have one more slide that I put in. This is just kind of I just kind of put a rough checklist. If you were looking at an RFP at a high level on the types of things that you would want to include in that RFP response for vendors to respond to, these are some of the categories that I would put in there. Things that, like I said, I think stand up pretty big. The API type of capability, I think, is significant. The integration piece is very significant. I think the ability to do full packet capture as well as metadata is very big. And then actually seeing, and I think John's going to dig into this from a Solera perspective, you know, what does big data analytics mean? What are the actual use cases? How are you going to use analytics to, you know, find the needle in the needle stack? There's another nice cliche that we like to say all the time. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to John and continue on with the Solera side of this.
Thanks, Rick. Excellent. So wonderful overview. I think Rick touched on, you know, a few key areas that are very, very critical. I think hopefully what you'll see next is kind of how does that align with, say, some of the new emerging technologies, which certainly we feel are very, very critical to achieve the kind of capabilities Rick just reviewed with you. And hopefully within these slides, we'll kind of touch on most of those. So I've got a lot to cover. I'm going to try to fly through this quickly enough. But before I do, I just want to kind of talk about some news that broke just last week, which many of you may be aware of. The news was that Blue Coat is acquiring Solera Networks. So, you know, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that today, but I think you'll be able to see within the slides I'm going to present how it is truly kind of like their chocolate and our peanut butter coming together to kind of deliver something that's really good to address the capabilities that Rick just reviewed. And essentially what we're going to do is combine what they have, which is an awful lot, with what I'll review with you today to really deliver what we feel will be the most comprehensive security analytics and advanced threat protection platform. And again, ultimately, the result of that is that all of you will be able to better and safely use the web, your applications, and all the things you need to do to drive that business. So stay tuned for a lot more on this. But when you combine their 75 million users on their Web Pulse cloud, for example, dynamically with what we have in our visibility, I think there's a lot to come on this. So let's dive into just, you all know this, but I'm gonna talk quickly about how those capabilities play in terms of today's environment. So a lot on this. We just continue to see more and more around the actors that are kind of attacking enterprises and organizations and agencies all around the world. They're using a lot of advanced techniques, zero-day threats and targeted attacks and advanced and unknown malware and everything under the sun to attack them. At the same time, we have built a pretty good security fortress. I call this, however, kind of our picket fence. It's a wall that's very tall and substantive with phenomenal point solutions, and a lot of these now are integrated. We'll talk about that. You need all these solutions, but at the end of the day, there still is a gap, and this is a gap we must really, really be aware of. And you know, that gap is one where we lack the context, we lack the visibility, we lack the content, We lack the metadata to really get to see things about the data, and ultimately that means we kind of lack really good advanced threat protection against the kind of threats that everyone is facing every day. And if we do that, then it'll really make the kind of objective of better availability, confidentiality, and integrity much better. What is the state of all this? I mean, and we see this in the latest Verizon report, and I know Rick blogged a lot on this and wrote a lot of phenomenal feedback and comments around the Verizon report. But a couple things that we pull out here, right? 92% of breaches perpetrated by outsiders. So there is a threat within, and we'd like to talk about that, and that is there. But the overwhelming majority of reports are perpetrated and coming at us from outsiders. We know that phishing is big. 95% of state-affiliated attacks employed phishing techniques. So whether it's phishing, other kinds of social engineering, this is a massive issue. And so there definitely is a combination of technology and people and knowledge around that we all must be aware of. But that is a big issue. And 70% of attacks are discovered by external parties. So this speaks to the fact that organizations are kind of ill-prepared to see these attacks, identify them, and just discover them in general. It's mostly a third party that's going to do that. And so, again, it might turn the light on the fact we need some better technologies to combine with what we have deployed today to be able to see these and discover these threats and attacks. And so when we look at advanced persistent threats or advanced targeted attacks, like I say, the reason we call them advanced is the techniques used and the actors that are using those techniques are pretty advanced, such those that they get in, right? So 84% of these attacks penetrate and have success against their targets within seconds, minutes, or hours. And so 60% of them are with hours, 84% of them are within that time span. That's very fast. So they're successful, right? Because they're pretty advanced. They're persistent because when they get in, they not only stay around, but they morph, they move laterally, they move and continue to move toward their target. That means they stay around for a long time. So 78% of them are not even identified or discovered for weeks, months, or years. And this is a big problem, massive problem we have to deal with, right? And so, if we step back and take a look at the situation, there are several things we'd like to talk about, right? I mean, big data security is definitely here. We'll talk about it. Leveraging the volume, the velocity, the variety of data. Prevention by itself doesn't scale. I think that's an issue. We need the preventive technologies we have today, but it's certainly not scaling to the extent we need. What kept us secure before has kind of stopped working. It might have stopped a long time ago all by itself. We need security to work together. It does take a village. We need new technologies to kind of help us in this area. And as sometimes you'll hear Kevin Mandia of Mandiant say, when he comes and cleans these things up, whether it's an A+ or an F- security fortress that the company has, either way, it's often irrelevant with the resources and the motivation that the attackers have today. So content, context, visibility is the new imperative, and we've seen just recently in the past couple days stories around the bank attacks and the infrastructure attacks from Iran, as well as the long laundry list of defense technologies that the Chinese have been able to see lately. And I just keep saying, often we hear the same response that, hey, my fortress is strong, and we're pretty confident they didn't take all the data. And that's a response we see a lot. And I think we need to understand that we do live in a post-prevention world. So the fortress actually isn't strong enough. And when we think they might not have accessed all the data, the reality is they probably have it all, because we don't know. We really don't know the answer to that question. So from a landscape perspective, we've seen a beautiful evolution of technology starting at layer 2 with ACLs and doing flow analysis, then moving into the technologies we have today, IDS, IPS, content filtering, next generation firewall, deep packet inspection, leveraged here at these layers. As Rick said, you need the visibility at layer 7. However, there is still a gap. And so this is the gap we want to talk about, which is around getting context, content, visibility, doing the things you see on the side, whether it's, multi-packet inspection, obviously we need visibility of layer 2 through 7, full packet capture, malware analysis, all these things. We'll talk about them. And this is really the heart of kind of big data security analytics, and how we can leverage this for better and really what would be the best advanced threat protection we can get today. So there are two sides of the coin to this technology that I'm talking about right here. And I like to say one side is real time. In other words, having real-time visibility of things that are happening, attacks that are occurring, malware that's infiltrating your network, as well as post-breach security. That's the other side of the coin, having visibility of something that already happened. And so this slide is talking about that other side of the coin, which is, look, I've been breached, and now I need to answer some pretty critical questions that, frankly, I am not in a position to answer unless I have that visibility, context, content, right? Who did it? How did they do it? Did they, exploit a vulnerability? If so, which one? And where's the vulnerability? Did they access my data? If so, which systems? Did they exfiltrate data? If so, how much? I mean, if there's 1 million records, did they take all 1 million of them, or did they only take, say, 15,000 of them? That's a huge information that's good to know. Is it even over, and can it happen again, and are they still on the network? These are questions that only the certain technologies will be able to answer, and we need to answer these questions because it's inevitable that these attacks will happen. So let's talk about the data. And we know there's big data, as Rick said, it's very big. Data is big because it's voluminous. Data is big because it's high velocity. Data is big because it's of a big variety in the type. But at the end of the day, if we can harness all of those things and derive insight from that, then we can get something from it. And this is what we're after. The point is not the big data. The point is the insight and intelligence we can derive from the data, and that's the point of it all. And so if we can combine our intelligence with analytics and advanced malware detection, that's vital to what we believe is a more modern, advanced threat protection strategy. And this is why I think the combination of Solera and Blue Coat is going to be so powerful that I think it's going to surprise a lot of people in the market in a very, very good way. And that's a good advanced threat protection strategy. Big data security analytics, best of breed prevention. That's the security intelligence, insight, and context that will be key to solve that issue I showed earlier, where these attacks penetrate in seconds and hang around for months or years, right? We need this because it reduces that window of opportunity. So if we now have that insight, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the metadata, right? Now, instead of just, for example, knowing that maybe an exe file is in my environment and was downloaded, let's now get more context. So rather, let's say we have just seen a small, packed, obfuscated exe file that was just successfully downloaded from a non-standard port, from a new domain that's only been active for 5 days, from a country that's on one of my embargo lists. See the difference? If I know that versus, man, it's some exe file I have no idea about, I'm going to have better context, and this is the kind of visibility we want to give. So, if threats are persistent, we need security that's persistent and advanced, that's always on, that's always looking, and that's really what we're going to try to get to. So let's talk about what I feel are the keys to kind of effective advanced threat protection. And we're going to talk about 3 kind of areas of this, right? And it also includes the integration layer, which is so critical. So I'm going to talk about all 3 of these, the threat intelligence, the big data security analytics, and the security visibility. We see this as kind of a 3-legged stool. And at the end of the day, whether you're getting all of these 3 things from us or through our integration with our ecosystem, it's okay, but you need all 3 of them. If there are only 2 legs on that stool, we feel it's incomplete. And so let's talk a little bit about each 3 of them. So threat intelligence, huge, right? Really, really critical. We see this as something that, again, is harnessing a lot of intelligence from a variety of sources and from a footprint. And again, this is really where, when you look at someone now, Blue Coat, the threat intelligence, they're seeing threats before anyone else sees them, just because of the presence and 75 million users, 15,000 customers, all dynamically on that cloud. But this is combining a host of things for real-time threat intelligence: reputation, whitelist, blacklist, sandbox analysis and detonation. That could be on-premise or cloud-based, of course. It's data enrichment, right, of external data and other data. It's an intelligence cloud that's brokering this and dynamically updating it constantly so that it can share this information not only with a single organization, but with everybody that needs that information. And it's a machine learning architecture. So we need to dynamically learn as we get this threat intelligence, and that's very, very critical. As well, we need the visibility, and without that, these are now foundational issues, which is why these next two are kind of at the bottom of this triangle. This is the foundation, essentially, of what we're doing with big data security, intelligence, and analytics. It's full packet capture. It's layer 2 through 7 indexing. It's deep packet inspection in a really big way. It's reconstructing sessions and flows. It's scalability and performance to make sure we're keeping pace with your network. And it's doing all this and delivering it to you in a single pane of glass. So this is hugely critical. Of course, the big data security analytics, I mean, this is the heart and soul of it. This is, you know, capturing the data, looking at it, doing analysis on it to, you know, deliver heuristic detection, statistical analysis, doing some inferential reporting, context-aware analysis, and that is even getting, the context awareness is even getting better as we integrate with the ecosystem, leveraging intelligent algorithms, and again, deriving visual insight. What should I be looking at, right? And what should I be looking for? That's what we want to tell you. But the integration layer is critical. We see this technology sitting at the heart of the tools you have deployed. And when I mention that we're in a post-prevention world, I don't dismiss preventative signature-based solutions. No, I say we need them tremendously, and you should have them all and leverage them to their fullest. But let's make them better. Let's actually give context to those solutions through an ecosystem and through integration. So we sit at the heart of these, and we integrate right into the dashboards of your next generation firewall or your SIEM or your next generation IPS and your content filtering solutions and everything. And that's really at the heart of kind of this. It does take a village, and it's hugely critical. So how do we do it? We do it very quickly. I won't go into details, but you know, we're like a security camera on the network. We're just like no different than, say, a bank today that has locks and sophisticated security systems. It has a guard with a gun guarding everything. It has safes with, you know, locks that would make your head spin. But at the end of the day, banks have cameras everywhere. And they know that because if something does happen, they want to be able to play back the tape. And even tragedies like the Boston Marathon bombing, we know were essentially solved by playing back the tape, despite all the security at that event. And so this is really critical. And that's kind of how we're acting, right? We're recording, classifying, and indexing all packets, flows, files, applications from layer 2 through 7. We're giving you that real-time visibility of, you know, exfiltration and malware infiltration. It's actionable intelligence and insight. It's all of the flow enrichment and big data warehousing, because we are, you know, full packet capture platform. It's also, though, having this in a way, in a technology, in a package that's easy, that's flexible, that's you know, easy to deploy and use in your environment. So, you know, about the big data, it's not the big data, it's what we derive from it. So this, as we gather information, we're analyzing it, we're trying to sync relationships, and we're finding patterns and things to tell you what you should look for and what you should look at. We're deriving the data, the metadata attributes from that, which is the data about the data. We're giving you context and inference. This is my cute anonymous face, but you get the point of kind of how we can derive all of this and the metadata to tell you something. But at the end of the day, there is a difference between no sign of infection and a sign of no infection. And so it's not just about what's happening that might be bad, it's what's happening that I don't need to worry about. Because if you look at your dashboard and it says everything looks good, there's no sign of infection, that doesn't mean everything is good. We need a sign of no infection, and sometimes it could be a duck. But if we can get that sign and we're able to discern whether it's a threat or it's benign, that's as much a part of this puzzle as anything else. And so those are the kinds of things we're doing. And, you know, the metadata is very, very critical. it's like nonverbal communications. If you hear someone's voice but you can't see their face, you're not able to derive some other insights about the positions they have, the frowns they're making, or their body language. Metadata can give you that insight, things that you can't get by just looking at it yourself. So what about the platform? Again, I'm not going to go into detail, but it does have to be technology that's easy. We deliver ours in software that you can deploy on leading hardware like Dell, HP, IBM, and others. We can also sell you a pre-configured appliance to make it very turnkey and easy. And we also deliver a virtual appliance so that you can deploy it in virtual environments and in virtual clusters, which is very, very critical. But at the end of the day, there are many use cases. Here are many, whether it's for real-time situational awareness or continuous monitoring, real-time kind of visibility of cyber threats, so detecting those and protecting against those, post-breach incident response, data loss monitoring analysis, policy compliance, acceptable use policies. These are all really big use cases, but they're not the only ones. And again, you can get a sense that with all these use cases, you can have, again, that dual-sided coin. Part of this technology is used to give you real-time visibility of things that are happening now, advanced threats, zero-day attacks, unknown malware, as well as post-breach security, so you can answer those questions, derive kind of the insight to determine material impact and root cause that you need post-breach. And so those are the things that we're delivering there. As far as the platform, you see the use cases, you see the threat intelligence, lots of integrations. And now just imagine what we can do now that we will do together with Blue Coat, with their footprint and the things that they see, deriving all of that together. It's going to be quite spectacular. The big data analytics, which is really the base and foundation of our platform, and all the different sensors you can get, the ways you can deploy those. That's the platform. Again, a couple things I'll close with again, this is not easy stuff. And this is an emerging industry, and there tends to be technology thrown around, but oftentimes we don't stop to test it, to validate that it is doing what we say it's going to be that it's going to do, and that it's keeping pace with the speed of your network and your data. And so we did go out and do some third-party testing with ESG Labs. We validated our performance and our capture rate and our DPI engine. We validated our accuracy. We validated it across all the use cases that we put our money where our mouth is on those use cases. And we're going to continue to do that with other organizations and third-party test groups to make sure that we're keeping check around that. So as I close, how can you learn more? Just visit our websites. There we do have a book, Big Data Security for Dummies, which is really, really good to get a good overview of this technology. So do that. We've got a new book coming out very, very soon around advanced threat protection. Stay tuned for that. And so with that, let's take some questions. How are we doing on time? We're almost up to the end of the hour, but let's take a couple of questions. And so Rick, if you're still on here, what I think we'll do is, I'm seeing quite a few questions. I want to take some questions that are kind of geared toward you as a priority. And so starting with one of the first ones with you, let's see, this one is, how do I get budget for a NAV solution? So I'm going to just turn it over and let you kind of answer that.
Sure. So as I said, I get lots of calls with people trying to find ways to get budget. So two things that I would say. Verizon data breach, John mentioned. Reports like the Verizon data breach report, stuff Solera does, stuff Blue Coat does, the research labs, those can help you. What I suggest is, why not create your own company-specific report over the past year on trends and what's happening. It could be an annual report. I also say create an infographic. With the infographic, you could pick out the key things, and so you start making some awareness. I think the more that security leadership is involved at the table with the business decision leaders, the better. So I think those are two good ways to do it. I also absolutely think you should be driving your endpoint security vendors to slash their pricing. I would even threaten them that you're going to go to Microsoft Forefront for your endpoint security, and then the money that you're spending, which is not a small sum, that's going to those endpoint solutions, repurpose that for these network visibility solutions. But I think the days of huge markup and margins on endpoint security software need to end, and it's only going to happen if we push the vendors to say, look, this technology is not working for us. We want to invest in technology that is going to protect us, and I would use that as a strategy as well.
Excellent, thanks. Good, so Rick, another question to you here is, what is the best way I should approach vendor selection around a NAV solution?
So actually, John made a point just a few slides ago that I think that I think is really good, and that was test it. I think when I was an SC and now as I'm an analyst, people want to know, just tell me what solution. Not everyone, but many people want to know, just tell me the solution to buy, make my job easy. You absolutely need to test these solutions in your environment. If you're going to spend 6-7 figures on a solution, you need to make sure you get the right decision. I mean, if you think about if you're making a purchase of a new car, you're going to do a lot of research up front. You're going to test drive it. You want to make sure that this 5-year note that you have is going to be worth your investment. We need to do the same thing. And too many times, because of all the operational challenges companies have, they don't spend the time to do it, which I get. I've been in that place where I can barely stay above water as it is. I'm coming up for air every minute or so. So how do I have time to spend? But until we break this cycle and we find the right product and verify that it works in our environment, we're going to continue this cycle of bobbing in the water. Whereas if we can buy the right solution that's going to improve our operational effectiveness, it's going to improve our threat detection, containment, response, then I think we may be able to be up from the air a little bit more, and we're not reactive, we're more proactive.
Excellent, and this is a great question. I'm sure you've got this one before, Rick. Should I be expecting these capabilities you address from my SIM vendor?
No, I think it's two different roles that you have. SIM never came out to what we thought SIM was going to be, to this, AHA dashboard that tells us everything. Pragmatically, what I expect from a SIM is a good place for me to do log management, and when I'm having an incident, look at the logs. To be honest, the analogy I would use is SIM is looking in the rearview mirror, and using a nav solution is looking forward. And imagine if you're in your car and you're trying to drive while looking in your rearview mirror. It's just not the right way to go. So SIM has its role, but I think if you want to get real-time, kind of faster ability to see what's going on in your environment, that nav solution is better suited for those purposes.
Excellent. Bear with me. I'm trying to look at some of the other questions here, Rick. Any other I know there are a couple that are kind of directed to me. There's one, I don't know if you want to comment on this, Rick. There's a question here just asking, as the state actors and countries, as far as nation states grows, are we seeing kind of a set of top nation states that are kind of hacking companies worldwide? I don't know if you want to comment on that. It is a question we got here.
Yeah, of course you see China in the headlines. They're in the headlines this week, so there's no doubt about that. I think the important thing to know is that there's many other countries that are out there doing it. We just saw last week kind of a targeted attack for hire coming out of India, France, Russia, very advanced cyber capabilities. So, we're definitely the state-sponsored espionage happens all the time. The U.S. is active in it as well. Obviously China is at the forefront, and there's definitely, where there's smoke, there's fire to that. But I think it's important to realize that it's not just China, and you really can't just block a net block for a country, right? That would be the wrong approach, because anyone that's worth their salt is going to be coming through other locations to try to throw you off the trail. So I think it's only going to get worse as far as state-sponsored attacks against corporations. I think China is probably the most prolific out there, but they're certainly not the only one with that capability. Excellent.
That's great, Rick. Thanks so much. And I know that we're over. We've got a lot of questions, and we're not going to be able to kind of address them all without keeping everyone over too long. There was a question about how many partners we have. Please look at our site a lot. Too many to mention here. We integrate right into their GUI. with a lot. I mean, our ecosystem is really critical to us, and it's very extensive. We are partnering with Gigamon. There was a question there, already doing that. Typical deployments, again, this technology should be deployed at ingress, egress points. Companies generally start at the perimeter, but we advise very quickly, as many do, to move internal to the network in front of server farms and virtual clusters. Where your data is, that's where you need to have the visibility, right? And we've got a host of solutions, I think, that you can find that fit the needs you have. A lot of questions on the link to the recording. We will have this recording replaying, so everyone who's registered, and even those, everyone who's registered will get a follow-up with the link to the replay, so stay tuned for that. And with that, we're a little bit over. So Rick, thanks so much. Really appreciate the fantastic overview, and I know everyone did. We've got lots of comments here thanking us and thanking you for the great overview, so appreciate that. Thanks again, Rick. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and stay tuned for a lot of exciting things to come with Solera and Blue Coats, and stay tuned for always more of these kinds of webcasts to help you understand what you need to protect against today's advanced threats. So thanks for joining us, and thanks again, Rick.
Thanks, everyone.